Hey, I'm Lloyd Fry, and today I'm going to be talking about Music for 18 Musicians by Steve Reich. This is one of the most important pieces of music for me, and I was thinking about it just in preparing for this and asking myself, why is this music so important? And I think it comes down to the way that it totally breaks the expectations you would have of a classical piece of music. And I think if people listen to this, they wouldn't even think it's classical music. Just the way it works, the mechanics of it, the way he combines instruments, the instrumentation he uses is just completely different. And it feels like this sound world where Steve Reich created these rules that are just completely novel and completely unexpected and make a totally new type of music experience. So firstly, the piece is called Music for 18 Musicians. Let's talk about the instrumentation used for this. 2 clarinets, one being a bass clarinet, vibraphone, 2 xylophones, 3 marimbas, 4 pianos, 4 voices, violin, and cello. So right there, I mean, you just need to hear that, and you know this is going to be a very different type of music. A lot of his music uses a lot of that piano, marimba, vibraphone, the tuned percussion instruments. This one is a lot bigger as far as like the instrumentation and the size of the ensemble than most, and it's got obviously a much bigger sound because of that. So those 2 instruments can pretty neatly be put into 2 categories. So there's all the tuned percussion, the 4 pianos, 3 marimbas, 2 xylophones, and vibraphone. And mostly what those are doing is 8th notes, almost the whole time, and they're mostly playing the chords. So it's just like this sound bed of 8th notes that is pretty much there from the beginning to end. And then everything else, the clarinets, the strings, and the voices have a couple jobs. So they do the melodic type of material they're mostly doing. And they also, the clarinets and the voices especially, have these swell parts that are throughout the whole thing. And then there's also these like low, more like drony things where it's like oscillating between 2 notes. And the strings and voices do that a lot. The other thing I want to mention is the vibraphone plays an important role in this piece, because it in essence is the conductor. So it's a modular score, which means a lot of the sections you have freedom how many repetitions you do. And whoever's playing the vibraphone is in charge of signaling the rest of the group that it's time to move on to the next section. So it's a piece that's normally done without a conductor, which I think, knowing that, makes this an interesting listen. It's easy to miss that. Whenever the vibraphone is playing something, you know something is about to change. So that's definitely something I think that changes the listening experience if we're aware of that. So a little bit about the structure of the piece. It starts with 11 chords, and there's no melody, and the rhythm is very unified. It's just all 8th notes. And the pianos and marimba are doing the constant 8s. And then there's 2 swells per chord. What stands out the most in those swells is the bass clarinet. And the instructions are for those just to be as long as one breath can comfortably do. So crescendo, decrescendo, and then doing that twice, and then it goes on to the next chord. So that's the introduction, and then 11 chords, and that's 11 chords, and then there's 11 sections, and each section takes those chords in the order that they're presented and builds this miniature piece, and that chord is just the foundation the whole time. And then it kind of builds up and then deconstructs itself and then moves on to the next part. Now, a lot of those sections have a very similar pattern and a very similar thing that happens, and they all feel very much like a pyramid shape. So almost 100%. The section starts with the tuned percussion, and sometimes it's more marimba focus or piano, the tuned percussion playing the constant eighths. And then one of the instruments that's more doing the melody, so either the clarinets or the strings or the voices or some combination of those comes in on the melody. And those melodies have a very similar rhythmic feel. So through this whole piece, there's this rhythm where it's, I think of it as 12/8, and it's like 1 2 3 1 2 1 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 1 2. So that is like one of the keys to this piece, and there's almost never a time where some form of that rhythm isn't happening. So often when the melody is coming in, it's a one measure cycle, and he uses the technique beats for rest or rest for beats, which I feel like can be a little bit confusing. Just that's talked about if you read like liner notes or interviews with Steve Reich. And all that means is like you have some type of melody, and it's almost like you're clearing the slate except for one note, and then you're slowly bringing in the rest of the notes. So if we take like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, we'll just take that a little bit. If we were to use this beats for rest technique, it would be like, I missed the note, but you get the idea, where it's like the melody is pre-existing, and he's working his way backward and clearing all the notes other than one, and you'll do that for a couple cycles, and then the vibraphone will cue time to change, and more notes come in, and so that gets built up, and it normally, eventually, once it builds up, goes back to that rhythm, 1 2 3 1 2 1 1 2, and once it reaches that point, then the cycle of repetition moves from one measure to two measures, and then from there it normally changes to 4. And once we get to that 4, the peak of the pyramid of each of those sections is the swells from the beginning come back in. So often that's the clarinet and voice, and that happens 4 times or so, and then it goes through a level of deconstruction, coming down and going from 4, a cycle of 4, to 2, to 1, and then the next section starts. Let's take a minute and talk about some of the chords that he uses. So the first thing, I think the way he is using harmony here is almost non-harmonic in a way, because the chords are so stretched out. Often chords have this feeling of relationship of one chord leading to the next, which is taking you back to the one. And that's just not a part of the way these chords work. And it's almost like you need a different word for what's going on here, just because it's so different than your normal harmonic progression. The second thing is a lot of these chords are not super easily analyzable. Is that the word? That they don't fit into nice, tidy major, minor categories, and you can do it, but it's like calling this a major chord when it doesn't have a third in it feels not helpful. So, like this first chord that he plays, actually it's like this. So this is D, E, A, and G. Those are the notes involved. So you could call that, I don't know. It feels like, I don't know what you'd call that. I guess a D is on the bottom, so some type of D without the third, with the ninth and the fourth. But it's almost like he's intentionally avoiding any more typical sound with the sound of these chords. So not all of them, it feels like a lot of them are avoiding the third, which I feel like he probably did intentionally just to get away from the typical major minor sound. I think also at the root of a lot of these is chordal harmony. So like if we take, like the first thing the left hand does is D, E, A. If we rearrange that and put E on the bottom, we have E, A, D. So it's like that, but in an inversion. And if you know much about Steve Reich's jazz, had a huge impact on his music, specifically the John Coltrane Quartet with McCoy Tyner. And that's like what he was doing all the time. So I'm curious how much of that spilled over. Some of these, the chord changes, it's actually just the same notes rearranged, and some it changes. I'm not going to go over all of these. One that I did want to go over and talk about is the seventh chord, or the seventh section. We have, the eighth. We have this. So this is, and actually it would be up an octave. So this is a crazy cluster. We've got F sharp, G sharp, A, B, and C sharp with a D on top. And I wanted to point that out because that doesn't feel like that would come off smooth, and that doesn't even really feel like that would fit the vibe of this piece. It's kind of an odd, strange feeling of tranquility and calm. And this is this huge cluster. And I think it works, number one, because the instrumentation is on the tuned percussion instruments, piano and marimba. I think if you did that on violins, especially high, that would not sound good at all. And then even the fact that it's not ringing and that it's doing this, which that is pretty interesting to me, because I think there's a lot with consonance and dissonance that's not so much A equals B, but there's a lot of factors in how these notes come off and how these sound, and even the emotional feel of those chords or of those notes combined. I'm not going to go over all of the sections, but I did want to point out a couple things. So the first thing is, often when the section changes, the instrument jobs or the timbre has some sense of rearrangement. So it's like maybe in one section the clarinets are more in charge of the melodic content, and sometimes the section changes and then it's xylophone. There's one section where it's mostly the pianos are mostly doing that. So I think that's a piece when listening through this piece to focus on, that you can miss a lot of the interest is the timbre and the way the instruments are combined in these very unique sounds that are being created that almost don't even sound like acoustic instruments anymore. So one section that I specifically wanted to zero in on is section 9. So if you have the original recording that I had at the beginning, this starts at 48 minutes and 30 seconds. And this piece feels like the climax of the whole work. So first off, the melody is carried by the clarinets and the strings. Is it anyone? Yeah, the clarinets, the strings, and the voice. So typically, not all three of those are doing the melody, and just the sound of those three together is very unique and very notable. Then after they build up, then the xylophone and I believe the marimba start doing some of the more melodic content. And this section really feels like the climax because it's the busiest of all the sections. So it feels a little bit like the finale of the piece. And then coming off of that, section 10 feels like comparatively a sense of calm after this climax. And there's not very much of the melodic creation going up where he's like doing the beats for rest thing. And a lot of that is just the swells happening. And then section 11 after that feels like this return to what was a normal kind of like section 1 or the first couple sections where the instrumentation and the feel is much more like the beginning. So it feels like this climax and then this sense of calm and then a return to the beginning. And after section 11, we return to our 11 chords that we had at the beginning, and they're in their shorter duration where it's like 2 pulses per chord, and then that's the end of the piece.